One of the core aspects of video games since the very start is their ability to create a channel for people to interact with each other. In the 70s, a lot of games substituted things like AI opponents, with fellow players facing each other in various challenges. And in many ways, that never really went away. Of course, it looks very different today and went through several other phases before arriving here. But it's fair to say that games always had an inherent quality in their designs that to some extent furthered human connection. Perhaps the most obvious example of this is not the competitive multiplayer games spanning from Pong to Apex Legends, but the massive multiplayer online role-playing game genre, or MMORPG for short. These are games that harken back to both grandiose single-player adventures like Dragon Quest, as well as recreational tabletop games you'd play with your pals, except presented on a global scale in a digital environment. In many ways, these are not so much games as they are elaborate communication platforms. Sure, you may slay some monsters or go dungeon crawling with your team, but the sheer versatility of these games has historically allowed people to interconnect on an almost metaphysical level, where things like time, place, or even physical form are abolished for digital approximations of ourselves. Is it any wonder then that what may initially be sold to you as a level grinding pastime suddenly becomes something more? Worlds that pull you in and never let go. But these are not ordinary ecosystems. They are ones that either alter or perhaps even expand the human experience in their approach. And isn't that an interesting prospect? If you can let go of your earthly worries and step into another world as someone else, wouldn't that also be a prime opportunity to seek out a place that is more ideal than the one you already live in? A first step into finally discovering something deep and dormant within yourself. Like that you're just really gay and trans. Long before the internet as we know it today, the potential of computers, cybernetics, and simulations were nothing but highly speculative. The exciting prospects of the digital frontier, if you will, managed to capture the imaginations of people all around the world who eagerly took it upon themselves to visualize the future, with intriguing concepts such as
cyberspace.
In the late 60s, Danish artists Susanne Ussing and Karsten Hoff had already coined the term in their rather unknown collaborative project Atelier Cyberspace, where they took a radical and creative approach to the computer as a programmable architectural tool that could change how we were to create social spaces. This art collage was, however, very much grounded in the physical space rather than the virtual, and notably did not even involve any actual computers, as they obviously weren't commercially available at the time, and basically took up an entire room. For all intents and purposes, they didn't really exist. Their project was more concretely about managing real spaces, and the optimism of open-ended systems that could reshape and diversify how we live. They even had a concept in mind reminiscent of what we would later recognize as the 3D printer, which for the time must have been absolutely bonkers to even consider. This is, however, noticeably different from other later conceptualizations of the term that would come to be more prominent and heavily focused on the cyber sense of the word. Literary works like William Gibson's dystopian cyberpunk novel Neuromancer from 1984 would popularize cyberspace as a computerized virtual space that people could connect themselves to rather than any physical one. and while seemingly completely opposing to each other, both in tone and fundamentals, they more importantly have the space part of cyberspace in common. Whether that space be physical or virtual, the idea of creating them beyond rationality and perceivable technology is something that inevitably ties them together. Of course, we make these connections in hindsight, but nonetheless it is interesting to contemplate how not even rudimentary computers could hold back the imaginative outlandishness of how we could inhabit the future. A few years before Neuromancer in 1981, people could already read Vernor Vinge's seminal science fiction novel, True Names, that similarly tackles the idea of virtual reality and computerized spaces, where people take on different personas and explore new worlds beyond our own. Things that today aren't necessarily that far-fetched at all.
Oh, shit.
It is quite fun to sit here in the year 2021 and imagine a bunch of nerds who probably did not even write on a personal computer coming up with this stuff way before the fact. In that sense, it is not too surprising that these literary works have been called prophetic, and that they would become highly influential to anyone interested in the digital landscape, and online virtual worlds in particular, for years to come. Hearing the term online virtual world now will most likely make you think of games like World of Warcraft, or if you're a real old school ass gamer by today's standards, Ultima Online. The latter has often been wrongly attributed by people like your grandpa probably as the very first online virtual world to have graphical environments. But that is far from the truth. A whole 10 years earlier, in 1986, Lucasfilm Games developed Habitat, arguably the earliest attempt to make a commercial, large-scale online world, for the Commodore 64 of all things. Players could connect themselves through the Quantum Link online service to enter a wondrous world of imagination, opportunities, and adventure. Here, in the simulated virtual space, the connected users could communicate with each other and were basically left to create their own little societies, with businesses, accepted behavior, and whatnot. Although the graphics and gameplay may look simple and primitive, it is important to note that Habitat was kind of before its time, and a landmark achievement that established a lot of ideas and concepts that we take for granted today. Among the most important aspects, the game used what they called avatars, that were to represent the participants. These animated characters could be changed to fit the user's personal tastes and preferred identities, which were not just limited to regular humanoid forms either, and could take on a myriad of radically different shapes and sizes. Inspired by the previously mentioned cyberspace novellas like True Names, the developers leaned hard on the idea of being able to enter a digital world and become someone else, whoever you want to be.
Hey, listen, my real name's Henry. They call me Pops. I mean...
No, Thickwit. Henry's your human. He's just controlling you. Here you get to be someone else.
Well, then I guess I really am Valentino.
Talk about great expectations, lover boy.
And this is pretty much fundamental to online virtual worlds, what makes them appealing to a lot of people despite what the games in question look or play like. In a sort of post-mortem on Habitat published in 1990, developers Chip Morningstar, nice D&D name by the way, and Randall Farmer said that they felt that the defining characteristics of cyberspace is the shared virtual environment, and added that the display technology used to transport users there isn't necessarily as important. That shared part, the interactions with others, the interpersonal connections formed in that virtual environment, is what truly makes the online worlds real in a sense, where the presentation of yourself through your avatar actually matters. The worlds in question, whether it be Azeroth or Eorzea, may just be ones and zeros on paper, fake in contrast to our physical world, But by way of communication and interaction, they spring to life and become social places that are very much real to anyone participating. Both the games and the players themselves are influenced by different cultures of the physical world, but are likewise capable of creating new ones. We might not notice the formation of these cultures explicitly, or even think about it a lot while knee-deep in raiding dungeons, doing dailies and whatever. But in these virtual spaces, players engage in social practices and rituals. They form norms and perform roles and identities for others to see, not unlike our real world. This is where the cultures of an online game world emerge. If you have ever played an MMORPG, you can probably come up with several examples of etiquette, norms, and behavior that are performed in whatever game that first come to your mind. Think the bustling social hubs like Limsa Lominsa, unwritten rules of queuing up for high-end content, pretending to be AFK when an argument becomes too heated, or why not something as simple as waiting for your turn to kill a quest mob in World of Warcraft Classic. Early attempts to create open-ended cyberspace worlds like Habitat are, because of their lack of predecessors, perfect examples of how people in online virtual worlds create culture through social interaction. One of the great debates among the players of Habitat revolved around the usage of weapons and their impact on the society as a whole. Questions about whether killing an avatar was a crime, and if weapons should be banned entirely, led the developers to change the system to where cities would be safe, while the wilderness was more unpredictable when it came to misdeeds. Not everyone was satisfied with this though, and the debate would continue on with one of the more prominent people in the anti-violence camp creating a church, the Order of the Holy Walnut, and eventually with an election for a sheriff. Similarly, in the now seemingly defunct Digital Space Traveler from 1996, the developers saw culture and behavior emerge in their virtual world. Here, the players were represented by floating 3D head avatars that could move their mouths when the user spoke through a microphone. Really natural and ambitious stuff for the time. Interactions through speech was basically the name of the game, and as such, codes of conduct for these interactions quickly formed. Even in the virtual realm of Traveler, users explained that they felt a sense of personal space, and that they would experience discomfort if others violated that space by coming too close, for example. Listening to the players from the time, it is clear that there once was a living, breathing culture built on friendship, curiosity, and perhaps even drama.
We have had soccer games, we have had funerals, we have had weddings, there are so many things going on at so many levels here. There are romantic interludes, there are people who've met here, and some of which have gotten married. You know, it has changed many people's lives. It has very deeply changed my life. If this were gone, man, I don't know what we'd do.
With all this in mind, it is not surprising that online virtual worlds would be interesting social environments to explore and research. Places where nerdy academics with backgrounds in sociology can basically go buck wild and make ethnographic studies flourish. From just listening to me blabber on about it, you might already have caught on to how much this stuff actually excites weird nerds such as myself. I absolutely love this shit. Just sitting down to research the topic gets me carried away to the point where I have to stop myself to make sure I don't write 100 freaking pages about the complex social structures of Star Wars galaxies or something ridiculous like that. This interest does, however, not just come from me being a giant dorcas who thinks social interaction is the most compelling thing imaginable. I mean, that is clearly part of it, but it's a lot more personal than that to me. I've been playing online virtual world games, MMORPGs in particular, since forever. My palette for these things has been extremely varied. We're talking everything under the sun. Free-to-play Korean RPGs that no one remembers like Holic, or this weird-ass Zelda fan game based on A Link to the Past that I doubt there are any traces of at this point. Whether it be that crap or something more widely known like World of Warcraft, I have never really been that invested in the game mechanics. A lot of them are a bit stale, and to be quite honest, I just can't bother with the bullshit of so-called good players, who focus on other people's DPS as a substitute for a personality. It shouldn't come as a shock that what actually got me hooked on these kinds of experiences was the social aspects, the interactions with other players, and the bonds that were formed between us. I have always appreciated the fact that these are creative spaces where people are free to play with others and experiment with themselves. This means me, by the way. You see, the anonymity of a virtual world opens up a great amount of opportunities for players to examine aspects of themselves and lets them try out different identities that might be hard to play around with so frivolously in real life. My first time really engaging in such playgrounds was Guild Wars in 2005, a game I never finished and yet spent more time with than I'd probably like to admit. When I first began playing, I started off as a shitty guy character that sort of resembled me at the time, I guess, but it never really felt like a good fit, which prompted me to quite quickly make a new one. And this time, I made a female avatar, a short, cute necromancer with a name forever dating her to the manga craze of the early 2000s. I had friends who also played as girls, so I did not think of it too much at the time, but while they were motivated by not having to look at a guy's ass for hours on end, I myself never felt that way towards my avatar, because in some sense she represented me better than that other one I had made previously. Even though I certainly couldn't yet put such a complex statement into words. What followed was my first gender transgression. At some point, I found that people who met me in the virtual world simply assumed that I was a girl. They unpromptedly referred to me by female pronouns and essentially treated me like a woman. But I never actually corrected them, not even once. In fact, it felt great to be acknowledged like that. I loved coming back to be my avatar every single day for that very reason. In my baby brain, I tried to rationalize this as me just having a bit of fun. It couldn't be that I was actually a girl after all. And I kept thinking this for the longest time. Even after I started a somewhat long-term online relationship with my then guildmaster, who was a guy. Let's just say I had a lot of repressed things going on in my teen years. Things that I had not ever thought about before but were absolutely made possible in the online world that existed in my dad's crappy home computer. Eventually, I stopped playing Guild Wars. But this new identity I had found within myself followed with me. Not just into other online virtual world games, but also text-based role-playing forums where I basically continued to live out the experience of being a woman through playful performativity. In that sense, I owe a lot of my early trans development to Guild Wars and its free-form world of expression and anonymity, even if I could not truly appreciate that fact as a confused teenager. Going back to the game that sort of kickstarted my exploration of gender and logging into that old character to capture footage honestly feels strange, and sort of surreal even. The once bustling streets of Lion's Arch have been reduced to emptiness, but the computer characters follow their usual routine like nothing has happened. I see one of them wave towards the city gates, but no one comes. There are still players somewhere in Guild Wars, but the culture and life of this particular place is long since gone. A melancholic place where nothing but old memories remain. It's like they say, you can never truly go home again. For the subsequent 10+ years, other virtual worlds and those role-playing forums would become what sustained me, mentally speaking. I had managed to separate my real life where I was still living as a man and the online world where I was very much not, to the degree where I rarely had to think about the implication of it all. Because when I did, that was when the emotions happened. It's kind of like me putting these two opposite identities in separate boxes and making sure that they never touch each other, which of course works great until they inevitably end up touching each other. Let me tell you, fighting a part of yourself that just keeps growing and evolving is hard work, and sooner or later, something will have to give. That was certainly true for me, and what finally made my repressed self boil over was entering the wonderful world of Final Fantasy XIV. I started playing Final Fantasy XIV around April of 2017, 12 years after I first set foot in Guild Wars and essentially began my gender-questioning journey. That's a long time to self-reflect and ponder about who you truly are. A very long time. This Square Enix MMO did not make me finally realize I was gay and trans single-handedly, of course. We are talking about a wild ride of self-discovery that basically took me half my lifetime, and several different outlets to completely untangle and make sense of. But it was certainly helpful as a space where I could simply be and express these feelings authentically. Ever since day one, I have roamed the world of Eorzea as one single avatar, the cute Lalafell gal Eleonora, or Ellie for short. Through her, I was able to try out different aspects of myself, get a feeling of what I like to be, and play around with my own identity to a much greater extent than ever before. As I continued to play around with my avatar and hung out with other people in the cyberspace fantasy world, I became more confident about myself and felt a sense of control that I rarely had felt before. My time with this game made me recontextualize a lot of my previous experiences with games like Guild Wars, and what I found just fascinated me to no end. I knew I was not alone in my experience, so for the last few years I have been talking to a lot of people about the game, conducting interviews, having small talk, lurking around, observing, and just generally researching to learn more about the queer experience, particularly the trans experience in Final Fantasy XIV, and how MMOs can help us live out aspects of ourselves in different ways. I quite quickly found out that Final Fantasy XIV has a very robust queer community. Beyond the unofficial LGBTQ servers Gilgamesh and Fairy, nice, there are pretty much queer-friendly free companies scattered all across every single server. And on Discord, you can find Gayorzea among others as hubs for LGBT players to find each other. You might wonder what exactly it is about this virtual world in particular that speaks to this demographic. Why Final Fantasy XIV? Well, from what I can gather, there are many reasons for that. First and foremost, we'd argue that Final Fantasy on a whole is fundamentally queer, even if not explicitly so. By that I mean the series has never really been big on exploring characters through a queer lens, but it does have other aspects that are coded in such a manner, and almost begs to be interpreted that way. These games are often introspective journeys, with protagonists who struggle with their own identities, and the powers that keep them down. Whether that be their emotionally abusive dad spewing toxic masculinity, or them becoming magical beings marked as outsiders by society, and hunted for their otherness. These games are often about rebellious spirits that fight against unjust worlds and the systems within. There is also a very clear and distinct visual identity with ethereally colorful worlds and fashionable, pretty people. Noticeable all the way from artwork to screen, the androgyny of the Final Fantasy character is a staple of the franchise, almost iconic at this point. From the very beginning, Amano's character designs gave the series a well-defined personality, where even the most boldly masculine came with a touch of femininity. Something that has lived on even with designers like Tetsuya Nomura and his rather striking and uncompromising fashion sense. Regardless of intent, it's rather telling that a lot of characters from Final Fantasy and its many spin-offs like Kingdom Hearts have been called gay throughout the years. Partly because gamers have historically been weird about homosexuality, but mostly because it's true. Final Fantasy XIV is no exception in this regard. The first thing you meet as you open the character creator is a row of excessively beautiful people of different shapes and sizes, all with that trademark androgyny. Even the equivalent of what would be orcs and dwarves in other games have that distinct smoothness that makes them pop against a crystal blue background. Compared to its main competitor, Final Fantasy XIV is populated by beautiful fashion model people with a stunning fairy tale sheen to boot. Everything from the big bear men and the twinkish cat boys, to those sexy bunny ladies and the tall strong gals. Heck, even the lion furries, of course, have a certain appeal that seemingly resonate with a lot of queer players. Secondly, the culture that has been built around this game is perhaps one of its strongest assets. Final Fantasy XIV has a reputation of being a very friendly community, perhaps even to an almost aggressive degree. I doubt the "have you tried Final Fantasy XIV" memes have escaped you. And not to toot our own horn here, but I'd say the reputation is very much earned. It is a place where bad behavior and toxicity is quite frowned upon. People are generally helpful and willing to sacrifice a lot to make sure others, especially new players, have a great time. Why this has happened is hard to pinpoint exactly, but there are a few reasons I can think of. I've seen this culture be attributed to things like a very lax competitive scene, and how the developers are very real and transparent with their audience, something that the players then try to embody themselves. Throughout my interviews though, I often heard people unprompted compare Final Fantasy XIV to World of Warcraft, which was pretty universally accepted as a contrasting counterpole with a toxic community, essentially a group with more individuals who are inclined to be unpleasant and spread negativity.
Maybe it's because a lot of us tend to try to escape the games that are toxic, like World of Warcraft.
It's a very friendly community, especially unlike other MMOs, like World of Warcraft.
We don't want the game to become toxic, not like World of Warcraft.
It is a bit like an us against them mentality, but I believe these favorable comparisons only end up bolstering their social identity in a rather positive manner. It is a way of reinforcing the idea of what it means to be a Final Fantasy XIV player, which is to say, not toxic. And this is a fact that the players seem to take much pride in, a value which perhaps incentivizes others to follow suit to perpetuate the good vibes. No matter the real reason, I think it's safe to say that this positive culture is essential in making the virtual world a great place for queer people to explore and hang out in. Final Fantasy XIV is of course not unique in being a virtual space where marginalized people can find refuge, but it certainly has a great and stable foundation that makes for a decent place to build a safe space. Queer people, youth to a larger extent, have a need for such safe spaces, environments where they are less likely of being subject to harassment and abuse because of their identity. MMOs, and the internet in general, makes it easier to find solidarity with other people who face similar situations all around the world, and finding these communities can lower the risks involved with expressing yourself openly. A game like Final Fantasy XIV is to some degree disconnected from the outside world in the sense that you can be a bit more carefree with that expression. That is to say, there are less tangible social consequences for an individual when it comes to performing gender and sexual identity. Like I said earlier, the virtual world presents its users with the opportunity to become someone else, or perhaps even live out their ideal self as they see fit, which makes for a ripe playground where people can express themselves in ways that might otherwise not be possible. And this freedom of self-expression is clearly important to a lot of LGBT players. People have told me about how the game makes it possible for them to live out aspects of themselves, how it gives them permission to play around with gendered expressions. It's a world where you can become more of a blank slate, form your own personality, and for at least a moment, become that ideal version of yourself that you've always wanted to be. And everything can be done with such ease that a change feels inconsequential compared to what it would be in the real world. If you don't feel particularly girly one day, you could simply change your hair or clothes with the press of a button, and poof! A lot easier than changing up your entire wardrobe at the very least. You might not think much of it at first glance, but Ellie 2 is created from a very similar mindset. In some ways, I would consider her to be an idealized version of myself. And by that I don't mean I literally want to be a potato person in real life. It's of course to an exaggerated degree, but I think some of you can relate to the idea of wanting to be small and cute. In fact, I have always chosen these kinds of races in MMOs, and whenever possible, cranked that height slider all the way to the fucking ground. Eleonora's hyperbolic dimensions basically just makes her an easy vessel for expressing these ideals, not just visually but also when speaking through her. At the time, Ellie was a lot more soft-spoken and friendly than I considered myself in real life, which turned her into an outlet for me to practice that. I'm not going to pretend like this is a new idea either. People like the Habitat developers had already speculated about the possibilities of these games way before I could even think about these complex topics. Heck, even before I was born. During their time in the absolute forefront of a newly emerging playground of ethnographic study, they were inevitably faced with the questions of self and how technology could be used to empower the individual in unprecedented ways. Farmer even mused on these possibilities in an article about the game's social dimensions.
Cyberspaces, because they are anonymous, present people with a unique opportunity to present themselves in any manner they desire. Shy people can experiment with being bold, or they can present themselves as a member of the opposite sex.
And he was right on the money. Through his observations and meeting with inhabitants, he found that people feel safe enough to try on a different skin and experiment with social interactions. It can come off as a bit silly to put so much emphasis on this, I guess. But as a closeted trans woman, this little spot lady was one of the few ways I felt I could truly be myself and play around with aspects that would come to be very impactful steps in my real life. For example, she started off as a short-haired redhead and has during the course of our adventures changed looks quite drastically. That former look even prompted me to get a similar haircut and dye my hair red, which just goes to show how meaningful this avatar embodiment was for me. And in that sense, these are not just regular-ass video game characters to a lot of us, but more so extensions of ourselves, true vessels of performative play. These things did not happen out of nowhere, but rather evolved thanks to the connection between character embodiment and communication with other people that is quite unique to games like Final Fantasy XIV. In most games, you can usually identify with a character who has been pre-designed and is available to anyone. But you can't really make that character yourself in the same way as when you handcraft your own personal avatar and interact with other people. There are plenty of games that let you customize your character, but you usually engage with them in very different ways compared to online virtual worlds. Both have content that the player can partake in, sometimes even together with others. And I mean, this is a kind of interaction, but one is evidently more heavily focused on social interaction as a main goal. MMOs usually have a lot of activities where you beat up monsters, produce goods, or play a children's card game. But they also have spaces where you simply link up with other people and communicate through messages and emotes. This probably sounds obvious to most of you, like, duh, of course this is a thing in these games. But I think it's easy to take the social aspects for granted and lose sight of how unique they make the genre and how meaningful they can actually be to people. Social interactions are everywhere. It is arguably what makes us people. Isolate a guy from the world as a newborn, put him in the woods or something, and he would probably still be a gamer, but take away his Nintendo 64 and he would be no one. We probably don't think about video game interactions a lot. That is basically what I'm trying to get at. Just like we don't think much of ordinary old interactions in real life, because it's so fucking fundamental to us. A game like Habitat wasn't just about hanging out with other people in a virtual space. It was about taking on different roles, identities, and playfully becoming someone else, or heck, even your ideal self. Expressing these things in a vacuum, where no one is to respond, doesn't really amount to much. An empty MMO might still be playable to some extent, but there is a reason why it feels so eerie and uncomfortable. Creepypasta. By expressing ourselves in front of other people, we can practice roles, negotiate identity, and finally get feedback for doing so. We seek affirmation, we want to be acknowledged, and have our identities validated by the other. Life's a stage, and we are the actors, constantly putting on masks to fit the occasion, and performing in hopes of being accepted. MMOs are perfect spaces for this most human behavior to take place, a stage for gendered performance if there ever was one. We go backstage to gather props and carefully craft our outfits, spend time on making them just right before once again entering the front stage, to present ourselves as we want others to see us. It is possible for players to essentially swap looks on the fly and easily experiment with gendered expressions. Every encounter could be another opportunity to validate yourself through the interaction with other players. You know, there is a running joke in Final Fantasy XIV that glamour, the act of transforming gear and creating nice looking outfits, is the true endgame. It is presented in jest. The juxtaposition with high-tier raiding is clearly hyperbolic. But there is still some truth to the statement, I think. It tells us about how important the fashion aspect is, how much time and energy some people put into it, and most importantly, that it means something. The computerized world is indeed manufactured, but the feelings and striving to be someone is very much not. Behind every avatar is a real person, searching for meaning in one way or the other. Some people just play the game, while others live it. When I put the cute sweater and the skirt on Ellie, it wasn't for her sake. It was because I wanted to challenge the boundaries of my own gender identity and express myself in a manner that I otherwise could not. It is through being this character and interacting with other people in the virtual world that I could overcome several steps in my journey to come out as a woman in real life. If it weren't for Ellie and the diverse community of Final Fantasy XIV, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I suppose I have been rambling a bit, but you'll have to excuse me because this is just very personal. Despite that, I'd like to think this adequately explains the ways virtual social spaces can be used as valid places for anyone to explore themselves on a deeper level, and how the interpersonal nature of these realms blur the lines between the virtual and reality. See what I did there? I'm very clever. Some of you probably found it relatable. A lot of people I have talked to over the years have expressed similar feelings, and I sincerely hope that I could formulate something that accurately represents these exploratory experiences. I originally had a vision of making this into a thing where I would use a lot of interview quotes and research bullshit, but in the end I simply opted to not do that because my personal experiences were already creeping into everything and I just couldn't get a satisfying structure on it. That's a lot of work that some might see as wasted. But to me, it was all very informative and has helped me build a solid base for my own experiences and interpretations to rest on. I put so much time, energy, and thought into this whole thing that it sort of turned into a garbled mess of genuine emotions and research in my own head. I think I managed to untangle it all by the end. But there was no way it would ever come out exactly like I had imagined it to anyway. And maybe that's for the best. I did not necessarily get as many voices in there as I wished I could, but while I am being this candid, I want to believe I represented them through my own words at the very least. An article from Gaming Mag by Erin Donegan really caught my eye though. Erin's experiences of using the virtual world as a space to explore identity is one that resonates with me, obviously. But it also gives some very interesting insights into how these worlds can be helpful to people like us. For about €6, you can buy a Fantasia potion that lets you change a single character's gender and race in Final Fantasy XIV. The price is an obstacle. And you can't help but feel a bit exploited considering how the store presents the whole thing. Almost like they know exactly who they are selling to. Nonetheless, Erin found that it opened new possibilities and challenged them to think about their own identity.
Final Fantasy XIV asks a commitment from the player to change their gender in a way that it doesn't for its other appearance options. And while I find this to be a kind of frustrating and manipulative decision by the developer, it forced me to think carefully in a way I hadn't before. To make that commitment, to be able to admit that I wanted to change this very real aspect of myself so dramatically was a hurdle. The fact that I was, in the end, willing to jump that hurdle told me a lot about who I was, things that I maybe would not have been aware of if not for this game.
And I suppose this is as good of a place as any to just say that I never intended to make Final Fantasy XIV sound like it is perfect, because it's not. I think it is clear that it presents the players with great tools to realize themselves, but they are still lacking in a few aspects that I heard repeated to me a lot during interviews. The world of Final Fantasy XIV is still a very binary one. No matter who you are, you could probably make a character that you are comfortable with, but the system of having only two genders is quite honestly needlessly restrictive in a fab fantasy land like Eorzea. This also applies to several pieces of clothing that sadly can't be worn by both male and female avatars. There are some clothes that are indeed gender neutral, and the developers seem to have caught on to the fact that people want these options. But it is far from satisfactory for anyone who wants to make that cat femboy dream reality. These restrictions, quite frankly, kinda suck ass in games that otherwise put such an emphasis on freedom of expression. But you know, gay Rome wasn't built in a day. Same-sex weddings were not a thing at launch, and with time and much feedback, it was added in the end. A non-binary option might never come to Final Fantasy XIV, for whatever reason. But hopefully the lack thereof can be an example that other developers learn from to make the opportunities better for everyone in the future. I just can't help but be optimistic about this, because that is what these virtual worlds always have been. Unlike the grim cyberpunk inspirations from where they originated, cyberspace worlds just exude a bright and hopeful outlook on the possibilities of human interaction beyond physical reality. I'm positive about this because games like Final Fantasy XIV have been meaningful in my own self-development. They have cheered me up during some of the darkest times of my life. And I simply want others to be able to have a similar experience. I want others to have a space where they feel that they can be themselves. And that just makes me hopeful. Despite everything, I hope we can get there in the end. Expressing ourselves, hanging out, talking, and just being in these spaces might be unproductive to some. Complete nonsense, meaningless even. But they are wrong. In the final section of that article about habitat that I mentioned earlier in the video, Morningstar and Farmer responded to a Usenet discussion, where a worker in the field dismissed the then current version of the game by boiling it down to a bunch of inane and trivial conversation. And I think they had a very poignant answer to this.
To dismiss the system on this basis is to dismiss the users themselves. They are paying money for this service. For them, it's neither inane nor trivial. To insist otherwise presumes that one knows better than they what they should be doing. Cyberspace may indeed change humanity, but only if it begins with humanity as it really is.
At least to me, this captures the spirit of what I have been trying to say in this video. Rich social communities are the core of any virtual world, and interactions are what makes them real and meaningful. This belief will always ring true to me. The nebulous content we engage with is there as a vehicle to bring us together, to explore, find ourselves, and to dream. Becoming someone else, someone you'd like to be, is a tantalizing prospect for a lot of us. And sometimes that experience is exactly what we need to move on with our real lives as well. These avatars we embody in-game are not entirely disconnected from us. They can't be because of how much we express through them, in chats and by performing as them. They let us extend ourselves beyond what is otherwise possible. And I don't think these virtual spaces can even be considered entirely fake. They have to be acknowledged as real in a sense, because the freedom and agency they bring to people through their expansive social worlds do make a difference. They could even reveal who you truly are. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you want to see more of this, then you can support us on Patreon. And on that note, we want to thank our current supporters. And they are Andrew Jones, Luke, Afayette, Ben Clark, Bibi the Bitch, Cult of the Hyena, Ember, Mrasa, Gage McColgan, Joel Nilsson, Claes Morals, Mattias Graman, Meowmix64, Masling, Nate Kiernan, Nishsvet, TB Skyen, Tommy Håkansson, Abigail Nail, Andreas, Anonymous, Aaron Rain, Basklin, Billy Moran, Botch Frivarg, Charles Goldhaber, Chloe, Chloe Strange, Eli Bergmas, Ephemeral Mist, Fluffquist, Frankie Teardrop, Marika, Marby, Max Miller, Mikael Ottens, Mitch Haley, Nathan Schaff, Never Haunting You, Scott from NerdSync, Silly Rookie, Skyhoppers SR, Sweet Pink, Sylva Rigota, Tobias Mattsson, VG, Whimsim, C33, Amelia Browning, and Chimeras, and finally, Anders Eklöv, Andreas Argulander, Archagent Everlasting, Artemis, Ash Gynex, Biopanda, Baba Kenzie, Casey Explosion, Connor O'Toole, David J. Bradley, Dylan Robinson, Emil Olin, FY, Philip Winter, Flim Flamberge, Florian David, Goopy, Gothic Garfield, Gustav Granlund, Isaac Abrahamsson, Jelly God, Jose Villarreal, Juan Banuelos, Just My Narratives, KG, Karen Scholes, Lady Goggles, Lily T, Losty, Magnus, Margaret Krubiel, Meg Hahn, Melang Rubin, Miko, Morgan, Nathan Anderson, Neon Blitzer, Oscar Funes Galindo, Pam D, Patrick H, Peter Spielman, Rivokas Magma, Riley Rose, Robin Ottens, Sandra Leonardova, Siddharth Madasudan, Sky Marina, Starfighter, Styx, Tegan Bread, Trash Baby, Trucy, Tough Emily, Victoria Arshel Solis, Saifi, and Elias. Wowie Sowie, that's 100 of you. Like we said before, we're going to make some changes for the outros of these videos because they are getting very long. And to do that, we have planned to basically make it so that we read all the people who are $5 and up and everyone who is new for the month. We will probably make a Patreon post about it too, just so we can spell everything out more succinctly, I guess, which will be great. You will love that post. It's going to be really cool. There's going to be some transparency lore in it, probably. There's going to be some hidden message that you can pull all the letters together and then you form a word that will probably be like bunkum or something. Look forward to that. Anyway, I'm melting, so I'm leaving. Bye, everyone.